Bringing disco back, let's talk about synths in the drop. First off, we have the main lead, which consists of 4 synths. The first one being Contact Session Horns Pro. Second one being Omnisphere, which is a stack of 2 separate sounds, one of them being a glockenspiel and the other being a brass synth stab. Next up we have 2 serum patches. Number 1 is a just kind of like this sine wavy, slightly distorted patch. It's got a bit of portamento and glide onto it. And that's got saturator, OTT, RC20, bit of erosion, giving him that high-end white noise, a reverb, which isn't on right now, but it does turn on later in the track. I've also rolled off the low end, and yeah. Next up, we also have this synth, which is another serum patch. This one has the coarse pitch being modulated by this LFO, which kind of gives that you know, that really fast high pitch to low pitch drop sound, which you kind of hear a lot in a kick drum, because fundamentally a kick is basically just a sine wave being played from a really high pitch to a really low pitch extremely quickly. And so this is kind of what that's doing, but instead I'm using it as the actual like transient and the attack of this main lead. And that's got a bit of saturation, some multi-band compression. I've also rolled off the low end, much like the previous synth. And yeah, altogether it sounds like this. And this main lead is actually also stacked with some piano sounds as well, but that's part of the instrument section, so I can talk about that a bit later. I've grouped it all together and I've put even more processing. Number 1 is just a compressor, just to make sure everything's kind of playing at the same levels. And then we have a gem dopamine, which is one of my favorite exciters right now, just giving that bit of sparkle and high end. Soothe 2, taming any of the harsh frequencies. And then we also have gain automation for the middle of the section where there's a lot of stuff going on in the growls and dubstep growl stuff. We have another section with some like distortions, all just giving a bit of that crunchiness and making sure that it's kind of as loud as I can get it without it having too many transients and stuff. So just basically trying to smush it as much as I can. And then I have this EQ just rolling off the low end and a bit of the high end. And then Soothe, which is being sidechained by the vocals, so that whenever the vocals play, it carves all those frequencies from the synth just to make sure that the vocals and synths aren't clashing against each other frequency wise. And then next up we have a little plate, just adding a bit of reverb, and then this Pro L2 limiter, just smushing the crap out of this thing, just to make sure that there isn't any transients and any peaking happening in the final output of this bus. So you can see it's kind of like really cutting off all the peaks and just leaving the main meat of the actual sound. And then next up we have this reverb tail, which is made by cutting, for example, like taking this first note of this main lead and then just like pasting it somewhere else and then adding a crap ton of reverb to it and then bouncing it to an audio file and then just reversing it. Next up, this group, which is just 2 VST plugins from Contact, just filling in the empty gaps in between the lead melody and giving some of the energy, high end energy. So as you can see, I've cut out all the places where the main lead melody is playing, just to make sure that everything is kind of playing only when it's absolutely necessary. And yeah, it doesn't sound too crowded, because already this track is pretty dense and pretty intense. So I'm trying all that I can to make sure that everything kind of fits together like a jigsaw puzzle. And that's kind of how I do it with volume automation. And then next up, we also have this kind of Neuros-based synth patch, which I made in Serum and then made into an Ableton instrument rack. And basically what I've done is that instead of being a Neuro bass, I've just kind of pitched it really high up and then made it as a Hoover. And this one has a bunch of effects on it as well. It's got disperser. I don't know what disperser does really. I know it's a phaser and it kind of moves around a bit, but it really just fans up the sound. So that's why I use it in this instance. And it's got a bit of low end roll off as well. I think you'll notice the pattern that a lot of these instruments, a lot of these synths have their low end rolled off because I need to make some room for the bass instruments, which I can talk about a bit later. And then next up we have the main chord synth. So this consists of 4 different synth patches, but primarily 2 are playing. The first one is a Omnisphere patch, which is just like this tacky piano honky tonk. This is giving most of the high end attack and transients. As you can tell, it's very, very bright. We have this one, which is kind of giving most of the body and sustain of the actual chord synth, and it's just the same brassy synth patch from the main melody. And then, yeah, in between those 2, we have this patch, which is just a Prince kind of like vibrato horn stab thing. This preset I found in Omnisphere. It sounds great, and I've used it in this section that's in between the first half and second half of the drop. And then also we have this track here, which is just a Contact patch, Session Horns Pro, which is basically just like fattening up that layer and giving it a really nice touch to it. In terms of the effects for the main chord synths, we have some Soothe 2, being sidechained to the melody, making sure that there isn't any frequencies that are clashing too much. A gate, just removing the tails of the synth chords. RC20, isotope trash. I've also got an EQ here, boosting the mids, rolling off the low end and a bit of the high end. some gem dopamine, decapitator, saturator, just a bunch of saturation just to fatten up the sound. Some soothe. Again, this one's being sidechained, however, to the growls. Next up, we have a bit of RC20, frequency shifter, some soothe, fat filter, limiter. And then next up, we have these two little chord stabs consisting of a string ensemble staccato patch and also a brass patch. That's just there for the first hits and the second half as well, just to give some impact to the beginnings of the drops. And then the growls. So in terms of the growls, we have a couple small ones. So what I've done is I've actually bounced this out into this patch here. And it's like just like this yappy sound. In terms of the effects for this, it's just a crap ton of distortion. And so as you can see, I've got this little rack here and I've called it MSG. And it's just a bunch of distortion saturation. Here we have synth growl, which is just another serum patch. This one I've actually kept the MIDI track instead of bouncing it out as an audio file. So yeah, really like lasery and fat. This one, as you can see, it's just a bunch of LFO stuff happening, controlling the levels, the cutoff with the comb filter, a bunch of effects in this room here, and then some retune, which is just the harmonizing plugin for those who don't know. Color-based producers love it. It's it's very similar to pitch map, which I've also got on this track as well. And then we have an EQ8 just boosting a bit of the low mids and rolling off the low end. What a surprise. And then a saturator, disperser, a vintage verb, and the distortion plugin. I think this one's slightly shorter. That's what it sounds like anyways. Yeah, as you can see, I've got an automation thing going on here, just cutting it off pretty abruptly. But next up we have these two small growls that happen kind of in between the call and response sections of the track. This one, you know, has some saturation, disperser, and then what I've done here is that I've used fission to split the transients and the tonal body of the sound into two separate channels. And then what I've done is that I've soloed the tonal body only, and then I fed that signal through pitch map and little plate and retune. What I've done is in pitch map is I've just, you know, wrote out an F minor 9 chord basically. Actually it's an F minor 11 with the B flat, but that's just there to shape the body into an actual harmonic tonal chord instead of just being a big, you know, wave of noise. And then I've kind of done that purposely just so that the high end transients and all the tack of that growl isn't pushed through the harmonizer, which in a lot of times will sound artifacty and it will sound a bit weird and odd. So I've just made that decision so that everything's as clean as it can be. And then I've got a huge boost in low end because I guess in the serum patch I didn't get enough low end as I wanted. We also have a gem dopamine just boosting the high end a bit, saturator, another limiter, and then a decapitator. And I'm guessing so this one is also the same thing, just panned to the left instead. The first one will pan to the right, and it's basically the same thing, just with some minor adjustments. Finally, in terms of the synths, we have this. So this is just some little yonks, which I made in a sound design session, and I don't know, I just absolutely love these sounds. So it's very, very quiet and very, very subtle, but it only comes up during the same section as the vocal chops, just to give it some rhythm and just kind of lay out the groove of the track and emphasize it. It's very, very subtle, but when you pay close attention to it, you can really hear it. And it's also panned left and right so that there's some interest, you know, when you're listening with headphones. For the most part, that's basically all the synths in the drop. I think that's about it. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll cover the other sections soon. So, see ya.